Hashtag the gladiator arena. Marcus Chen had always been good with his hands. Growing up in the slums of New Detroit, he'd learned to fix anything that broke: electronics, engines, even people sometimes. What he never expected was that these skills would land him in an alien gladiator arena, fighting for his life while thousands of creatures from across the galaxy cheered for his blood. The transport ship had been attacked 3 months ago. Marcus was just a maintenance engineer heading to the outer colonies when the pirates struck. But these weren't human pirates, they were something far worse. The Zorati Syndicate specialized in capturing rare specimens for their entertainment networks, and humans were apparently the newest addition to their collection. Now Marcus stood in a holding cell beneath the Grand Coliseum of Vex Prime, listening to the thunderous roars above. The arena was massive, carved from black volcanic rock and capable of holding over 2 million spectators. Species from every corner of known space came here to watch gladiators fight, bet on outcomes, and enjoy the spectacle of controlled violence. The cell door hissed open, and Krell stepped inside. The Zorati was typical of his species, 8 feet tall, covered in chitinous plates, with 4 arms and eyes that glowed like amber coals. He served as both Marcus's handler and torturer, depending on his mood. "Today is special, human," Krell clicked in broken galactic standard. "You face the Bone Crusher of Rigel. Very popular fighter. Has killed 43 opponents." Marcus didn't respond. He'd learned that silence often served him better than words in this place. Instead, he checked his equipment, a simple plasma sword and basic armor that looked impressive but offered minimal protection. The arena masters wanted fights to look dramatic, not be over too quickly. "You know the rules," Krell continued. "Win and live another day. Lose and become entertainment for the crowd in a different way." The alien's mandibles clicked in what passed for laughter among his kind. The preparation chamber was a bustle of activity. Alien attendants applied theatrical makeup to enhance Marcus's scars, while others adjusted cameras that would broadcast the fight across the galaxy. The Zorati had turned violence into the ultimate entertainment industry, and Marcus was just another actor in their deadly show. Through the preparation room's viewing screen, Marcus could see other fighters being led to different arenas. There were Krex warriors with their bone spears, Valdorian assassins with their poison blades, and even a few other humans who'd been captured from various raids. Most wouldn't last a week in this place. The crowd's roar grew louder as Marcus was led through the tunnel toward the arena floor. The sound was overwhelming, a mix of screams, cheers, and alien vocalizations that seemed to make the very walls vibrate. Betting displays flashed odds in a dozen languages, and Marcus noted grimly that he was heavily favored to lose. The arena floor was covered in sand that had been stained red-brown from countless battles. Massive screens showed close-ups of fighters from every angle, while smaller displays provided statistics and betting information. The architecture was designed to amplify sound, making every clash of weapons echo like thunder. In the center of it all stood his opponent. The Bone Crusher was a Rigelian, standing nearly 9 feet tall with natural armor plating and arms that ended in razor-sharp claws. Its species had evolved on a high-gravity world, making them incredibly strong and durable. Yellow ichor dripped from its claws, a paralytic toxin that would make its victims helpless while remaining conscious. Marcus had studied dozens of these fights during his captivity. The arena masters provided recordings to help fighters prepare, though Marcus suspected it was more about building dramatic tension than actual assistance. He'd learned that Rigelians were powerful but not particularly fast, and their natural armor had weak points at the joints. The announcer's voice boomed across the arena in multiple languages simultaneously. Marcus caught fragments, something about the savage human from the Outer Rim facing the undefeated champion of the eastern sectors. The crowd's enthusiasm was infectious, even if it was directed at watching him die. Combat began without ceremony. The Bone Crusher charged forward with surprising speed, its claws extending toward Marcus's chest. He rolled aside at the last moment, feeling the displaced air from the creature's swing. The crowd gasped, then cheered. They appreciated good defensive moves almost as much as brutal attacks. Marcus had learned to put on a show. Pure survival wasn't enough in the arena, fighters needed to entertain to earn the crowd's favor, which sometimes meant better treatment or equipment. He spun his plasma sword in a flashy pattern before settling into a defensive stance. The Rigelian was methodical in its attacks, using its reach advantage to keep Marcus at a distance. Each swing of its claws could easily tear through his light armor, and the paralytic toxin made even glancing blows potentially fatal. Marcus had to stay mobile, using his smaller size and human agility to avoid damage. The fight continued for nearly 10 minutes, an eternity in arena combat. Marcus managed to score several hits on the creature's joints, weakening its mobility. The crowd was on its feet now, sensing that the underdog might actually have a chance. Betting displays flickered as odds shifted in real time. The turning point came when the Bone Crusher overextended during a powerful downward strike. Marcus stepped inside its reach and drove his plasma sword up through a gap in its natural armor. The creature let out a sound like grinding metal before collapsing to the sand. The crowd erupted. Marcus had not only won but done so in spectacular fashion against a heavily favored opponent. Alien spectators threw items into the arena, some valuable, others merely tokens of appreciation. The arena masters would be pleased, upset victories always boosted ratings. As Marcus was led back to the preparation area, he caught sight of something that made him stop. In one of the VIP viewing boxes sat a small figure that looked almost human. But, as he looked closer, he realized it wasn't human at all, it was something else entirely, something that seemed broken and afraid. The figure was clearly young, though Marcus couldn't determine the species. Its skin had a slight blue tint, and its eyes were larger than human normal. Most disturbing were the restraints around its wrists and neck, not the simple chains used on gladiators, but complex devices that seemed designed to cause pain. The creature in the viewing box was watching the arena with an expression Marcus recognized all too well, the look of someone who had given up hope. It was the same expression he'd seen on new fighters during their first weeks in captivity, before they either adapted or died. But there was something else in those large eyes. Intelligence. Despite its obvious youth and current circumstances, the being was studying everything around it with careful attention. It was learning, planning, waiting for something. Marcus was pushed along by his guards before he could observe more, but the image stayed with him. In a place where survival meant focusing only on the next fight, he found himself thinking about someone else's suffering. It was dangerous thinking in the arena, but he couldn't shake the feeling that their paths would cross again. Back in his cell, Marcus lay on his simple cot and stared at the ceiling. The victory had earned him better food and a day of rest, but it had also raised his profile. More dangerous opponents would be arranged, and the arena masters would expect increasingly spectacular performances. Through his cell's small window, he could see other parts of the complex. The Zorati had built an entire entertainment empire around the arena, complete with hotels, restaurants, and shopping areas where wealthy aliens could spend their winnings. It was a city dedicated to the consumption of violence. Somewhere in that complex was the young being he'd seen in the VIP box. Marcus had no idea who or what it was, but something about its situation bothered him more than his own predicament. Perhaps it was because he'd chosen to fight back, while the creature seemed trapped in a way that made even his own captivity look like freedom. Sleep came eventually, but Marcus's dreams were filled with large, intelligent eyes and the sound of restraints clicking shut. Tomorrow would bring new challenges in the arena, but tonight, he found himself planning something that went beyond simple survival. The arena had rules, Marcus had learned them well. But every system had weaknesses, and he was beginning to see possibilities that his captors might not have considered. The young being in the viewing box represented more than just another victim, it represented a chance to do something meaningful in this place of meaningless death. As the artificial lights dimmed to simulate night, Marcus began to plan. Not just for his next fight, but for something much more dangerous and important. The arena was meant to be a show, but perhaps it was time to change the script. 3 weeks passed before Marcus saw the mysterious being again. His status as a rising gladiator had earned him access to different parts of the complex, including the fighter preparation areas that served the premium viewing boxes. It was during a routine equipment check that he glimpsed the creature being led through a service corridor. Up close, Marcus could see more details that made his stomach turn. The being appeared to be roughly equivalent to a human teenager, but its species was clearly different. Its skin had the blue-gray tint he'd noticed before, and its large eyes were a deep violet color that seemed almost luminous. Most disturbing were the fresh marks around the restraint devices, evidence of recent struggle or punishment. The creature was being escorted by two Valdorian guards, a species known for their cruel efficiency. They were heading toward what Marcus had learned was the private entertainment sector of the complex, an area where wealthy patrons could enjoy more personal and, often more brutal spectacles. Marcus made a decision that he knew was foolish but couldn't ignore. Instead of returning to his cell as ordered, he followed at a distance. The private sector was a maze of luxurious chambers and viewing rooms where the galaxy's elite could indulge their darkest appetites. Marcus had heard whispers about what happened in these places: fights to the death between captured children, torture sessions broadcast live to paying subscribers, and worse things that even hardened gladiators refused to discuss. Through a partially open door, Marcus watched as the young being was led into a viewing chamber decorated in the style of ancient Zorati nobility. The room's occupant was Vezek the Collector, one of the arena's most influential patrons and a being whose reputation for cruelty was legendary even among his own kind. Vezek was ancient by Zorati standards, his chitinous shell decorated with scars and trophies from countless violent encounters. He owned a private collection of rare sentients that he used for his entertainment, and it was clear that the young being was his newest acquisition. "Today we test pain tolerance," Vezek clicked to his attendants. "The Lamari are supposed to be empathic. Let us see how much suffering this one can endure before its mind breaks completely." Marcus felt his blood freeze. The creature was a Lamari, a species he'd heard about but never seen. They were supposed to be incredibly rare, with natural psychic abilities that made them valuable for certain types of research. They were also supposed to be extinct, wiped out during the Zorati expansion wars decades ago. Through the viewing window, Marcus watched as the young Lamari was strapped to a device that looked like a cross between a medical table and a torture rack. Its violet eyes were wide with terror, but there was still that intelligence Marcus had noticed before. It was trying to understand its situation, looking for any possible escape route. Vezek activated the device, and the Lumari's back arched in silent agony. The being's empathic abilities apparently made it feel pain more intensely than other species, which was exactly what made it valuable to collectors like Vezek. The old Zorati watched with obvious pleasure as his victim suffered. Marcus had seen enough violence in the arena to become somewhat numb to it, but this was different. This wasn't combat between trained fighters, this was the deliberate torture of what appeared to be a child for the entertainment of a monster. He found himself moving before he'd fully decided to act. The service corridors were designed to be invisible to patrons, allowing staff to move throughout the complex without disturbing the atmosphere. Marcus had learned these routes during his weeks as a featured fighter, and now he put that knowledge to use. The room's security was designed to keep people out, not to prevent escapes from within. Marcus accessed the chamber through a maintenance hatch, emerging behind Vezek's viewing platform just as the old Zorati was preparing to increase the device's intensity. The first Valdorian guard died before he realized Marcus was there. A quick strike to the neck severed major arteries, dropping the alien silently to the floor. The second guard had time to reach for his weapon but not time to use it. Marcus's plasma sword took off both his arms before piercing his chest. Vezek spun around at the sound, his forearms instinctively reaching for weapons that weren't there. In his private chambers, the old Zorati had grown complacent about personal security. "You," Vezek hissed in galactic standard. "The human gladiator. What are you doing here?" Marcus didn't answer immediately. He was looking at the torture device, trying to figure out how to free the young Lamari without causing additional harm. The restraint system was complex, designed to inflict pain while preventing escape. "I'm changing the show," Marcus finally said, beginning to work on the restraints. "Your entertainment just got cancelled." Vezek's mandibles clicked rapidly, a sign of extreme agitation. "You have no idea what you're doing, human. That creature is worth more than your entire planet. The Syndicate will hunt you across the galaxy for this." The Lumari's eyes focused on Marcus as he worked to free it from the torture device. There was confusion there, but also something like hope. When Marcus finally released the last restraint, the being sat up slowly, its movements careful and pained. "Can you understand me?" Marcus asked in galactic standard. The Lamari nodded slightly, then spoke in a voice that was barely a whisper. "Why?" The question was simple but carried enormous weight. "Because nobody deserves this," Marcus replied, helping the being stand. Especially not someone your age. Vezek had been backing toward what Marcus assumed was an alarm system, but now he stopped and began to laugh, a sound like grinding metal that made Marcus's skin crawl. You think you're saving it? Vezek clicked. You fool. The Lumari is my legal property, purchased from the Syndicate's acquisition division. Even if you escape this room, you'll both be hunted down and returned. And, when that happens, I'll make sure its suffering lasts for years. Marcus considered this information while keeping his weapon trained on the old Zorati. The legal system in this part of space was complex, but ownership rights were generally respected by all major factions. Taking Vezek's property would make Marcus more than just an escaped gladiator, it would make him a thief, with all the legal consequences that implied. Then, I guess we'll have to make sure we're not caught, Marcus said. The young Lomari had been listening to this exchange with growing alarm. It spoke again, its voice stronger now. You should not do this. He speaks truth. They will hunt us. They will make you suffer as they made me suffer. Marcus looked into those large violet eyes and saw something he recognized, the same desperation he'd felt during his first weeks in captivity, the crushing realization that escape was impossible and resistance only brought worse punishment. Maybe, Marcus admitted. But sometimes the right choice isn't the smart choice. He began searching Vezek's chambers for anything useful. The old Zorati had collected various items from his victims over the years, including several pieces of advanced technology that might prove helpful. Marcus found a personal shield generator, a universal translator, and, most importantly, a data pad containing access codes for various parts of the complex. The young Lomari watched these preparations with growing confusion. I do not understand. In my dreams of escape, I always ran alone. Why do you risk yourself for a stranger? Marcus paused in his searching. It was a good question, and he wasn't entirely sure he had a good answer. Where I come from, we have a saying, nobody gets left behind. Maybe it's stupid, but that's how I was raised. Vezek had been unusually quiet during this exchange, and Marcus realized why when he noticed the old Zorati's lower left arm moving slowly toward a concealed control panel. Marcus's plasma sword removed the arm at the elbow before Vezek could complete whatever he was attempting. The Zorati's scream of pain was loud enough to alert security, which meant their time in the chamber was nearly over. Marcus grabbed the young Lumari's hand and headed for the maintenance shaft. Wait, the Lumari said, pulling back toward something on Vezek's desk. It was a small crystalline device that pulsed with soft light. Memory crystal, the Lumari explained quickly. Contains records of all his acquisitions. Other survivors, other suffering. Evidence of crimes. Marcus understood immediately. The crystal wouldn't just be useful for exposing Vezek's activities, it might contain information about other Lomari survivors, other victims who could be saved. He grabbed the device and shoved it into his equipment belt. They escaped through the maintenance shafts just as security forces arrived at Vezek's chamber. Behind them, Marcus could hear the old Zorati screaming orders and threats, demanding immediate pursuit and promising terrible punishments for both escapees. The maintenance tunnels led to the complex's industrial sector, where massive machines processed waste and maintained the arena's various systems. It was hot, noisy, and filled with toxic fumes, perfect cover for fugitives trying to avoid detection. The young Lomari was struggling to keep up. Whatever torture it had endured had left it weak and disoriented. Marcus found himself half carrying his companion as they navigated the maze of pipes and machinery. What's your name? Marcus asked during a brief rest stop. Kira, the Lomari replied. Though I have not spoken it aloud for many cycles. They preferred to use numbers. Well, Kira, I'm Marcus. And, we're going to get out of this place. Kira looked at him with those large violet eyes, and Marcus could see the conflict there. Hope warring with despair, the desire to believe fighting against cycles of disappointment and pain. The ships, Kira said finally. In my time with him, I observed departure schedules. There is a cargo transport leaving for the outer systems in 2 hours. If we could reach the loading docks. It was a dangerous plan, but it was better than anything Marcus had been able to devise. The loading docks were heavily guarded, and they would have to cross several public areas to reach them. But it was also their best chance at getting off Vex Prime before the Syndicate could organize a full-scale manhunt. As they prepared to leave the industrial sector, Kira suddenly grabbed Marcus's arm. The touch was light, but Marcus felt something like an electric shock run through him. For a moment, he could sense emotions that weren't his own: fear, gratitude, and something like determination. "Your mind," Kara said softly. "It is different from others. There is pain there, but also something else. Something that refuses to break." Marcus realized that Kira's empathic abilities were allowing her to sense his thoughts and emotions. It should have been disturbing, but instead it felt oddly comforting. For the first time since his capture, he was with someone who truly understood what he was feeling. "We should go," Marcus said. "The longer we wait, the harder this gets." As they moved toward the loading docks, Marcus couldn't help but think about what they were attempting. Breaking out of the arena was probably impossible. Taking on the entire Zorati Syndicate was definitely impossible. But, looking at Kira's determined face, he realized that impossibility had never stopped humans before. The show was supposed to be about violence and death, about the strong dominating the weak. But maybe it was time for a different kind of story, one about courage, sacrifice, and the refusal to accept that some suffering was inevitable. The real performance was just beginning. The loading docks were a maze of cargo containers and automated equipment, filled with the constant noise of ships being loaded and unloaded. Marcus and Kara crouched behind a stack of supply crates, watching the security patterns and trying to identify their target transport. The cargo ship they needed was a massive vessel designed for long-haul runs to the outer systems. Getting aboard would require timing, luck, and probably violence. The dock workers were mostly automated, but Zorati security teams patrolled regularly. "There," Kara whispered, pointing to a ship with Rigelian markings. "That one departs for the Kepler sector in 40 minutes. The manifest shows it carries mining equipment and processed minerals." Marcus studied the loading process. Robotic systems were transferring large containers into the ship's cargo holds, while a small crew of organic beings supervised the operation. If they could get inside one of the empty containers waiting to be loaded, they might be able to hide until the ship reached its destination. The plan required split-second timing. They would have to move during the brief window when a container was positioned for loading but not yet secured. Marcus had identified a container that appeared to contain atmospheric processors, equipment with enough internal space to hide 2 people for several days. "Ready?" Marcus asked. Kara nodded, though Marcus could sense her fear through their empathic connection. She was terrified but determined to try. It occurred to him that she might never have been outside a cage or restraint since her capture, making this escape attempt an act of incredible courage. They moved during a shift change, when security attention was focused on the patrol handoff rather than cargo operations. Marcus cut through the container's secondary hatch using his plasma sword while Kira kept watch. The atmospheric processor inside was large enough for them to hide comfortably, with sufficient air recycling capacity to keep them alive during transport. Inside the container, darkness was nearly complete except for the faint glow of status lights on the machinery around them. Marcus activated a small emergency light he'd taken from Vezak's chambers, creating a tiny bubble of illumination in the mechanical cavern. "Now we wait," Marcus said, settling into a space between 2 large components. Kara sat across from him, her violet eyes reflecting the emergency light. In the close confines, Marcus could feel her emotions more clearly. The fear was still there, but it was mixed with something like wonder. Despite everything she'd endured, she was amazed to be free, even temporarily. "Tell me about your people," Marcus said, hoping conversation would help pass the time and distract them both from the danger of their situation. Kara was quiet for a long moment, then began to speak in a voice barely above a whisper. "We were peaceful. The Lamari evolved as empaths because we needed to understand the emotions of the dangerous creatures on our world. But that gift became our curse when the Zorati found us." She described a civilization that had achieved harmony through emotional understanding, where conflicts were resolved through shared empathy rather than violence. The Lamari had been in the early stages of space exploration when the Zorati Syndicate discovered their world. "They wanted us for our abilities," Kara continued. Empaths can sense deception, understand motivations, even influence emotions in others. But we could not defend ourselves against beings who felt no guilt or remorse for their actions. The genocide had been swift and thorough. Most Lamari were killed immediately, but a few were kept alive for research and entertainment. Kara had been very young when her world died, and she'd spent most of her life in various forms of captivity. "I remember my parents," she said softly. "Sometimes, in dreams, I can still feel their love. It is what kept me sane through the worst times." Marcus found himself sharing his own story, growing up poor on Earth, learning to survive through ingenuity and stubbornness, his capture while trying to build a better life in the colonies. Compared to Kara's tragedy, his own suffering seemed almost mundane, but she listened with complete attention. "Your species is interesting," Kara observed. "I have touched the minds of many beings during my captivity, but humans are different. You feel pain and fear like others, but you also carry something else, a refusal to accept defeat, even when defeat is certain." Their conversation was interrupted by the sound of the container being lifted and moved. The loading process was beginning, and soon they would be aboard the ship and on their way to freedom. Marcus felt a mixture of relief and anxiety. They'd completed the first phase of their escape, but the real challenges were still ahead. The container was secured in the ship's cargo hold with a series of mechanical clanks and vibrations. Through the metal walls, they could hear other containers being loaded around them. The process took nearly an hour, during which Marcus and Kara remained silent and motionless. Finally, the sounds of loading stopped, replaced by the deep thrum of ship's engines powering up for departure. Marcus felt the subtle shift in gravity as the vessel lifted off from Vex Prime's surface, carrying them away from the arena and toward an uncertain future. "We did it," Kara breathed, her voice filled with disbelief. Marcus wanted to share her optimism, but he knew their escape was far from over. The Zorati Syndicate had resources throughout this sector of space, and Vezak's influence would ensure that every ship and station would be watching for them. They had maybe a few days before their container was opened at its destination. During the long hours of interstellar transit, Marcus and Kara planned their next moves. The memory crystal Kara had taken from Vezak's chambers contained detailed records of the Syndicate's illegal activities, including the locations of other surviving Lamari. If they could get that information to the right authorities, it might be possible to expose the entire operation. The problem was finding someone with the power and willingness to act against the Syndicate. The Zorati had influence throughout the galaxy, and their entertainment networks generated enormous profits that many governments were reluctant to disrupt. The Terran Colonial Authority, Marcus suggested. Humanity is still expanding, and we don't have the same economic ties to the Syndicate that older civilizations do. If we could get this evidence to Earth. Kara considered this possibility through their empathic link. Marcus could feel her evaluating not just the practical aspects of the plan, but also his emotional motivations. She was learning to trust his intentions, but her experiences had taught her to be cautious about hope. It might work, she agreed finally. But the journey to Earth would be dangerous. The Syndicate has contacts everywhere. Their conversation was interrupted by a change in the ship's engine rhythm. Marcus recognized the sound. They were preparing to drop out of hyperspace, which meant they were approaching their destination. Soon their container would be unloaded, and they would need to find a way off the ship without being detected. Through Vezak's access codes, Marcus was able to tap into the ship's communication system and learn their location. They were approaching Kepler Station, a major mining facility in the outer systems. The station was large enough to provide cover for fugitives, but it was also likely to have Syndicate informants watching for escapees. When the container was finally opened 6 hours later, Marcus and Kara were ready. They'd used the atmospheric processor's tools to create simple disguises and false identification documents. Marcus had cut his hair and altered his facial scars, while Kara wore a hooded cloak that concealed her distinctive features. The cargo bay was busy with automated loaders and a few organic supervisors. Marcus and Kara slipped out of their container during a shift change, blending in with a group of maintenance workers heading for the station's main levels. Kepler Station was a typical frontier facility, crowded, noisy, and filled with beings from dozens of different species. Miners, traders, and transients mixed together in the station's commercial areas, creating perfect cover for two fugitives trying to avoid attention. Their first priority was transportation. Earth was 3 weeks away by commercial transport, assuming they could book passage without alerting syndicate agents. Marcus used some of the valuable items he'd taken from Vezak's chambers to purchase false documentation and passage aboard a human-operated cargo vessel. The ship's captain was a grizzled veteran named Sarah Morrison who asked few questions and accepted payment in untraceable credits. Her vessel, the Iron Horse, was old but well-maintained, designed for long-haul runs through dangerous space. As they prepared for departure, Kara spent time studying the memory crystal's contents. The information it contained was staggering: records of thousands of illegal captures, detailed financial records showing syndicate corruption of government officials, and, most importantly, the locations of secret facilities where other survivors were being held. "There are 17 other Lamari still alive," Kara told Marcus with barely contained emotion. "Scattered across 12 different facilities. Some are adults who remember our homeworld. Others are children like me who were born in captivity." Marcus realized that their escape was just the beginning of a much larger mission. Exposing the syndicate would be important, but rescuing the other survivors would require resources and allies they didn't yet have. During the journey to Earth, Marcus and Kara refined their plans. The evidence they carried would certainly interest the Terran authorities, but it would also make them targets for syndicate assassins. They would need protection, and, more importantly, they would need people willing to act on the information. Captain Morrison proved to be more than just a transport operator. During quiet moments between star systems, she revealed that she'd lost her own daughter to alien slavers years earlier. She understood what Marcus and Kara were trying to accomplish, and she offered to help them make contact with the right people on Earth. "There are people in the Colonial Authority who've been looking for evidence like this," Morrison explained. "The problem has always been proving the syndicate's crimes without getting killed in the process." 3 days before reaching Earth, their ship detected pursuit vessels on long-range sensors. The syndicate had finally tracked them down, and they were running out of time and options. Morrison pushed her ship to maximum speed, but the pursuing vessels were faster and better armed. A running battle ensued among the asteroids of the Centauri system, with the Iron Horse using its superior knowledge of the asteroid field to avoid destruction. During the battle, Kara made a decision that surprised Marcus. She used her empathic abilities to reach out across space and touch the minds of their pursuers. Instead of trying to hide, she projected her memories of syndicate atrocities directly into their consciousness. The effect was immediate and dramatic. Several of the pursuing ships broke off their attack, their crews overwhelmed by the emotional impact of Kara's memories. The few remaining vessels continued their pursuit, but with less coordination and determination. The Iron Horse reached Earth's outer defenses with minutes to spare. Terran patrol ships responded to Morrison's distress call, engaging the syndicate vessels and forcing them to retreat. For the first time in months, Marcus and Kara were truly safe. The Terran Colonial Authority's response to their evidence was swift and decisive. Within days of their arrival, military strikes were launched against known syndicate facilities, while diplomatic pressure was applied to governments that had been turning a blind eye to the illegal activities. The rescued Lamari survivors were brought to Earth for medical treatment and counseling. Kara was reunited with other members of her species for the first time since childhood, an emotional moment that Marcus was privileged to witness. But the most important moment came 6 months later, when Kara approached Marcus in the garden where he was recovering from his own trauma. She no longer wore restraints or lived in fear, and her violet eyes held something they hadn't contained before: genuine happiness. "The Terran government has offered to help us establish a new colony," she told him. "A place where the remaining Lamari can rebuild our civilization. They want you to come with us, to help establish our defenses." Marcus considered the offer. Earth had given him a chance to return to normal life, but normal seemed inadequate after everything he'd experienced. The arena had been meant to be a show, a spectacle of violence for alien entertainment. Instead, it had become the catalyst for something much more important. "I'd be honored," Marcus replied. As they stood together in the garden, watching Earth's sun set over the ocean, Marcus reflected on how much had changed. A simple maintenance engineer had somehow become part of a story that would be remembered for generations, not as entertainment, but as proof that sometimes the right choice was worth any risk. The show had ended, but the real story was just beginning. And, this time, it would have a different kind of audience, one that celebrated courage instead of cruelty, hope instead of despair. Kara's hand found his, and, through their empathic connection, Marcus felt something he'd almost forgotten existed, a future worth fighting for, and the knowledge that some things were more important than survival. The arena had tried to make them into entertainment, but they had chosen to become something else entirely. They had become proof that no matter how dark the universe might seem, there would always be those willing to risk everything for strangers, to stand up against impossible odds, and to believe that freedom was worth any price. In the end, that was the most human thing of all.